Most likely, Shamish, what will you be, will engage in this activity of humility? If you just get a little bigger, you'll think to yourself, and you will have such illusions of grandeur that said to be back from your concepts. You see, the town of our mission is admonishing us every place, and even a person that has no reason in the world to be awful. He has nothing, no mileage whatsoever. The Beis Rachmanis can it learning, or that can be his status. He's a poor type, and every area he's poor. It's a ridiculous thing. Gaiva, of course, is so improper. The Gemara says, and this is the Gemara in Sotah, it says like this, and what we've learned a lot of times, I've mentioned it, this is the Mocha for it. Remember? An eighth of an eighth. That's 1/64th in this, and then if you want to find that out, you take the 8th Sedra in the Shis, you come to the 8th Pasuk, and it says, he says, I am too small for all the kindnesses that you bestowed upon me. You see, we only appreciate how wide away we are from what we should be, yes.
That, like, all you wanted to do was clean out a cesspool, and if you offered a good job, you'd say...
And this particular thing, they assume because they wear a certain garb to the proper service of God, but their uniform walks so that you can see what's in front of you. Shammai says, he used to say a lot of things, but this he used to emphasize, Asay Saratzchok Kavah, should make your Torah fixed. Then he said, Emor, say little and do much. And then a third thing, in the Kabul, is if you greet him with a friendly commentary. All right? A face, smiling face. And we have many explanations of these things. So let's see what it says here. See even a better thing. For the prime activity you should engage in both day and night, and then when you are tired from learning, in other words, the first priority is Torah. If you make the Torah a roy, the most important part of your activity is in work. And when you turn away from the work, that's exactly a very good question. What will you tell your boss?
Who's your boss?
Your Father in heaven.
That's right.
Moshe, it's a wonderful question. Why you should engage? Well, you tell your boss. Taki, that's a
you got to get it in.
If sometimes you have certain obligations upon yourself, and as a result of that, you cannot. This plan that are explained has to be your program. And God understands that. But it means that as soon and as often as possible, you must follow this particular plan in your activity. God's not going to go and destroy you if you have to engage in activity that obviously you beyond your control. But by the same token, when you don't have to engage in activity beyond your control, when you have time, then there's no longer this barake. For instance, those people that are engaged in working during the week, or even Sunday, a lot of times they'll work on Sunday, are getting out of market. You can't excuse yourself and say, because I work hard in the week, so therefore I don't have to learn Torah during the weekend, or at night, or in the morning, early before you go to learn or anything. You see, the whole thing is, it's attitude and the way you approach this thing, Torah, in the morning. Because he says, it's assumed that when you make a Birchas Torah in the morning, this is going to be your main activity this day. If you have to engage in any other type of activity, it's only a temporary thing. You're going to come back to it. Therefore, it's not necessary to make a new bracha.
the prime activity in terms of time, but in terms of importance, meaning if you have to work 8-9 hours a day because just to live, it's not because you don't want to learn Torah all day, it's simply because you have to live, but your main activity is learning Torah and doing mitzvahs.
Obviously, if it's beyond your control, yes,
Well,
Mishnah.
it's basically Torah. This also means mitzvahs.
Obviously.
Okay. Since
Job is
your occupation is considered...
Well, this is one explanation. You understand it as far as we've gone. Good. I've found written, I say sources, that you shouldn't be more strict to yourself and more lenient for others. Somebody asks you a shaila, you should be more strict. Of course, there's a different opinion about this too. So there's other opinions that hold just fakir, that you should be more strict for yourself and more lenient for others.
about
You asked me a shaila. You asked me a shaila time, can you eat in the kosher restaurants here in Chicago? And I always tell you, if they have some kind of shkocha, I give you the answer to go. But I personally don't. Whatever it is, I personally don't eat there. See, the only time I eat in a place is when they have us meetings, when it's completely under supervision all the time. But I don't put it on you, that obligation.
But nothing is watched all the time.
You have
You
on.
buy anything. You buy bread. You buy a lot. I mean, a lot of things. You can buy even in a
I'm talking about where you have a restaurant. This is the other way around. Be more strict to other people, be lenient for yourself, which of course is. The Torah should be fixed. The Ezra concentrated his intelligence, his grosh, his Torah on Hashem to go and investigate the law of God, also to do and to teach the children of Israel. Intelligence to do, Kachoyim also. So also he taught to the children. And Marmat, say little and do much. Now that's the mark of a tzaddik. Mark of a tzaddik is he says a little and he does much more than he promises. It's fakir. He says a lot and he does little. And of course we have the cases
all
here.
the politicians.
I would take some loaf of bread, and then they brought them, whatever. And the third phrase, you should go and accept everybody with a very favorable countenance, a friendly one. When you engage in the mitzvah of being hospitable to wayfarers, you shouldn't give them what you're giving them, but doing it with your face towards the earth, and like you will begrudge giving it. It's a big deal. You're doing something, but you're doing it in such a way you're making the guy feel terrible to be a recipient. Ushos, the karka, anybody who puts his face towards the ground and like he's begrudging it. If he happened to give all the gifts of the world, it's like he didn't give anything because God looks at the person when he's doing these things. According to the Rabbi Nura, gives us 3 warnings connected in relation to the 3 high positions that Rabbi mentioned. Chocham, Gibor, Osher. A wise person, and wise in Torah, and strong and wealthy. In relation to the wise person in Torah, you should fix, if we say Torah fixed, in other words, you should keep on learning. Don't rest on your laurels and assume that you know everything about the Torah. In relation to a wise person, it says, because who needs your conversation? The rich person.
Well,
Say little and do much. It's not the way people do it. Well, nowadays they have, he has money, so he goes out and he goes and when he does something, he makes everybody feel oppressed when he gives tzedakah, which is directly opposite to what you're supposed to do. And then connected Gibor in relation to the strong person, you should greet every person friendly, like you should conquer his passion. hora, and to fight against his bad intention, and he should treat people with consideration. Shonino Ezel, he is a truly wise, strong person. A person that can conquer his passion and treat people with proper consideration. This is the, and now, of course, the First Israel has something along the lines he had before. And while we're at it, and we got the Sefer in front of us, let's see what the first says.
Where does it start? With a Gimel?
All right, let me see. Let's look at there. It starts with a Nun Vav. That's 56. That would be the last three words. Way in the bottom of the second column. He's supposed to keep himself in. Also, he said, Gimel Devorim, he said three things. Gimel Devorim, Omar Shimon Tzadik. He said three things in relation to what Shimon Tzadik said. Tzadik, Omar, make your Torah fixed. And the second portion where he says say a little and do much, we're talking about doing the service of God. Omar and Omar say little. What Shalom say? In the time when you serve your God, promise little. You say you'll do a lot. You shouldn't say, a few exceptions, that you will promise you're going to do so many wonderful mitzvahs. In Cain, because if you do that, Israel, you have made a great vow to the God of Israel, and God expects you to live up to your word. So, excuse me if I quote my grandmother, Oliver Sholem. My mother used to quote my grandmother all the time, and I think it's very appropriate. My grandmother, you always tell my mother, your tongue is your enemy and your lips are your friend. If you kept your mouth shut, don't promise so many things, you wouldn't get so much hot water with God. You start promising that, and then you don't deliver, so why should God accept your word when you want them to go and do so, listen to you? Anybody that is customary to promise more than he can produce, there's always a lot of things that will stop him from doing it. We're human beings. We have, if the Rebbe doesn't want it, we can't get out of bed.
Question.
Yeah, Moshe.
I think Rabbi Akiva promised that woman that he would get her into Olam if she would tell him something.
He wanted to know if the child was yes.
So he promised something he wasn't really able to deliver.
He nullified it in his heart.
Is that permissible?
Not appropriate, but under the circumstances, the only way you could get the information. Well, your mother's entitled to leave Meichel on her covet. All right, now, there, it's good that you should not go and make any vows, rak me'at, only once in a while, v'mokam, hukrak, in an emergency situation, it's permissible to swear in order to conquer your Yitzhara. For instance, we had in Rus, an attractive young lady, and Boaz was very overcome with passion for her when she approached him in the granaries, and yet she's Govar Yitro, when his passion was overwhelming him, he swore by God that he would not touch her until he married her. He had that much control over himself, although he was presented with tremendous temptation, that he was able to do that.
Only one who is somebody keep it, but somebody who doesn't.
It is much better, Chazal tell us, not to make vows in the first place.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, that's what we do all the time. We keep her, and not only that, we make a hodah. We say ahead of time that in case, God forbid, we said something we shouldn't have said, and said b'li neder, we really mean b'li neder. We don't want to commit ourselves to do it. It's better you don't say you're going to do and do, than say that you're going to do, don't do. I appreciate that, but this is the problem we all have.
well, yeah.
In relation to the third part, the Omar Keneged, a klal khan, and here it's a thing, rich or oni, or wealthy or poor, and Nikolov, a person that is contemptuous or honorable, Boho, Ayadiyah, Nami, Akum, you include also non-Jews as well as Jews. You're supposed to treat them all in a friendly fashion. All right. Now we've had here this thing here. Now I want to go to the Shonim, which I did want to cover, and I'll start with Rabbeinu Yonah because I want to get that first. That concept because I did want to go to here. Thank you very much.
Well, no, you have to hold the siddur with your hands. So that
No, when you dry your hands, it asks me to shaila. You ask me to shaila, you dry your hands. It's hard to your memory if you dry it on your right. But if you did it and it was salted properly and everything, it is hard meat and it's harmful to your memory and so things like that. But the shas end of Avodah Zarah, you have it?
A little more this way.
Way in the back. Way in the back. Way in the back.
There you go.
Oh, we do it quite often. You should be able to. You found it? Have you found it? If you give it to me, I'll find it.
Yeah.
And this is the reason I wanted to learn this year today, that you should hear this concept. He says the way it says in the Avos Rebbe, Torah work. God makes him important. If you make the most important of your activities and your work of secondary, it makes such a person. Anybody makes his Torah of a secondary importance and his work the most important thing of his work. God makes this person secondary in the world of God. He wants to say, even though Shelo also Avera, this person has not done for whatsoever, but since he did not make the Torah the most important and the perseverance and the purpose which that has a great deal to do whether it is considered by God and whether or not it is. So it need not be necessarily only in times of time. In some situations, you are pressed by circumstances beyond your control to devote a certain amount of time in making work. I wouldn't want you to be boxed out of a hope to get a very good position in Olam Haba. It's not to mean the intent of that. It means to intend that the way you approach it, if you understand that this is the most important thing of your whole life, to do His will, to learn His Torah, to do His mitzvahs with the proper attitude, the proper performance, and the proper midas tevis, the proper standards of conduct. If you understand that, and when you come to perform the Rotzon Hashem, any mitzvah, you try to do it as beautifully and pure as possible, this is an indication that you hold very dear indeed the will of God. And you don't let it take a backseat to any other activity that you're engaged in. That's right. That's why I am explaining it this way. You're not to be, God forbid, to be despondent if circumstances beyond your control make it possible that you are tied down in a situation where you have to spend an order just to make a living.
Everything.
The generalization which we've learned a lot of times, and I repeat it to you again to tell you, if you have the proper intent and you want to do the will of God, and you want to do it as good as God will allow you to do it. If for some reason beyond your control you can't do it, an accident occurs and holds you back from doing it, provided you have a track record of attempt. But we're talking about, we're not that a Jew does a sin and does repent before he dies. Because this is the one thing that we have to do. Remember, no matter how bad we've done, if we repent, God is prepared to reward us. And I learned tales that Rabbi trying to make me a fussy. So he tells, well, one of the things that mentioned there is that, let me see, we're talking about somebody came to him and said there that I'm worried about my sins. He says, that part you don't have to worry about. We have something to do with sin. He says, I'm worried about my mitzvahs that I'm doing are not as good as they should be done. What I am doing is not so good. It's very difficult only because a person has a preconceived notion. A person is accustomed to think that since he has been doing bad things all along, so it's impossible for him to change his ways. And nothing be further from the truth. And the truth is, I remember I read another story there. I read it when I can't learn Etzem Torah, so I look at these stories, right? And there was a great sinner that had committed an offense, that if a person has committed a lot of sins, then God not only gives him a wife's slate clean, but he gives him credit for them as though they were mitzvahs. And he says, look how much you got if you just do tshuva. And he pleaded with him to do tshuva. So it's not a question that one thing a Jew should never begrudge another Jew. That a Jew, that God should never be a begrudge, and everything should be good for him. We are fine. This is what we covered. We covered at the tail end of, we were discussing the Sedra Ba'alosachom, and the beginning of Shishi in Ba'alosachom, it has two inverted nuns. And we say there, Rashi says that this is an indication that this is a separation between two. So it doesn't explain what the punishments are, but if you look a simple perusal of the psukim on the other side, after these two psukim are read, which we read all the time when we take out the Sefer Torah and bring it in, you mentioned several cases there where there are punishments. They desired things they shouldn't desire, and they were complaining about the mon, and afterward they send the mirage, and one thing after another, and then you look in the front, you don't see what appears to be any kind of punishment. It just seems to be talking about the katotros, the trumpets and everything, talking about everything there, and all of a sudden we have this break, and then all of a sudden we have one source after another. So we were learning it to Gemara Shabbos because there's a quotation in Rashi telling this Gemara Shabbos, and we were fast, hurried up, and I didn't have time to completely look over the Maharsha. I told some of you what the Maharsha said, but I didn't explain it completely, and I feel it's quite proper to repeat it. Prat, that I had another Shir Shabbos where I did repeat it, and I feel that it has a tremendous amount of proper material for us. And so with your indulgence, I will repeat the Shir, because the only one that heard it was my daughter and Mr. Samuels, and the others don't come to the Shir ordinarily. Now the first thing I want to call your attention to is a passage at the end of Shmona Esrei, of every that we daven. There is a passage in the end of Shmona Esrei. Now, with your indulgence, you'll look in the Birnbaum Siddur, and if you look on page Tfilas Shachris, if you look way at the end of the Shmona Esrei, that would be on page 95. Also, Shalom b'Meromav, God makes peace, 4 lines from the bottom. God makes peace among those that are above in heaven. Hu yaseh shalom, he should make peace, oleinu, upon us, kol Yisrael, upon all Israel. Imru amen, we say amen. Okay? It's one of the things that we say, repeat, and we end up all the time. Right? Samuel asked the Shaila, I don't understand what this means. Why is it necessary for God to make peace in heaven? What else did he say?
Why would he have to? Yeah, why would he have to?
My daughter, well, one thing is, peace is the, also, according to, after